Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The darkest morning. Imagine you're standing in a parking lot in the middle of winter. The sky is a cold, merciless gray. Your breath escapes invisible clouds. And you're clutching a cardboard box filled with personal belongings that now feel like a monument to your failure. You just got fired. Not because you stole anything, not because you were late or lazy or incompetent at your actual job, but because your English wasn't good enough, because the way you speak carries an accent that someone decided was a flaw, because those exact words came out of your boss's mouth like they were reasonable and fair. This is the story of how I lost everything I had worked for in America, how I hit rock bottom in a country that was supposed to be the land of opportunity, and how I fought back and won in a way that surprised even me. But more than that, this is a story for anyone who has ever felt like their voice didn't matter because it sounded different. For anyone who has ever sat in a meeting nodding along while inside their brain was running at full speed trying to keep up. For anyone who has ever wanted to scream, but couldn't find the right words in the right order quickly enough. And for anyone who has ever looked in the mirror and asked themselves, honestly and painfully, do I even belong here? That morning, everything fell apart, and I didn't know it then, but it was also the morning everything began to change. The morning I stopped being a victim and started becoming a fighter. My name is Elena. And this is not just a story about a job, because in America, your job is your identity, your security, your proof that you have made it, and when they take that away from you for the sin of having an accent, they're taking away something far more precious. They're taking away your dignity, your sense of belonging, and your belief that hard work actually pays off. I had been working at a mid-sized marketing firm in California for 3 years. 3 years of showing up early before anyone else. 3 years of staying late when everyone had gone home. 3 years of doing the tedious work nobody else wanted, because I believed that if I worked harder than everyone else, if I proved my value through sheer effort, they would have to see me, they would have to respect me. But that is not how the world works. And that is a lesson I learned in the most brutal way possible. My job title was content coordinator, which sounds impressive until you realize it meant I was the person who fixed everyone else's typos, organized digital files that no one ever looked at, and managed social media posts that got about 12 likes from the same people every week. But I loved it anyway because it was my first real job in America, my first opportunity to use my brain instead of my back. My first taste of what it felt like to be more than just invisible. I had come to America with my husband and our toddler son, with 2 suitcases and a dream that felt enormous even when our circumstances were tiny. And when I got that job, I cried tears of joy because it meant everything. It meant that my degree meant something, that my skills meant something, that I could provide for my family with dignity instead of just surviving. But the person who hired me was not the person who fired me, because the person who hired me was a kind woman named Mrs. Davenport, who saw potential where others saw an accent, who encouraged me, who told me I had a unique perspective that made my writing special. And when she left the company, I was devastated because I absolutely knew, that whoever replaced her would not see me the same way. Enter Mr. Harrison, a tall, red-faced man with a booming voice and a habit of making jokes at my expense that made everyone else laugh nervously while I smiled through the humiliation, because what else could I do? What could I possibly say when my English was already not good enough in his eyes and any protest would just prove his point? He started small, as they always do, with friendly corrections that were actually pointed criticisms, with comments about how I should practice more, with jokes about how my accent made me sound like I was singing when I talked. And I took it because I needed the job, because the job paid for our rent, because the job gave us health insurance, because the job was the rope I was clinging to in a country that sometimes felt like it was actively trying to drown me. But what I didn't tell anyone, what I kept hidden in a little notebook in my desk drawer, was that I was documenting everything, every comment, every joke, every time someone told me I wasn't American enough or I should go back to where I came from. Because deep down, I absolutely knew, that what was happening was not just unfair, it was illegal, and maybe, just maybe, one day I would have the courage to do something about it. Then came that cold winter morning when he called me into his office, and I knew something was wrong because he didn't even remember my name. He called me Maria when my name is Elena, and that small mistake told me everything I needed to know about how little I mattered to him, how I was just a faceless, interchangeable part that could be discarded when it became inconvenient. "Sit down," he said, "not please. Just sit down." And I sat with my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. And then he said the words that would change my life forever. "We need someone who can communicate more effectively with our clients. Your English skills are holding the team back. It's nothing personal. It's just business." "It's nothing personal," he said, as if my entire identity wasn't wrapped up in the work I did. As if my family's future didn't depend on this paycheck. As if the 3 years of dedication and effort meant absolutely nothing. About the engagement numbers, I had increased by 47%. About all the evidence that proved I was not a liability but an asset. But my English failed me in that moment. My voice cracked, my throat tightened, and all I could manage was a quiet, pathetic, "Okay." I walked out of that office with my cardboard box, past my coworkers who looked down at their desks and pretended not to see me, past the woman who had shared her lunch with me, past the man who had helped me with difficult phrases, past all of them who were too uncomfortable to even say goodbye, and I sat in my car in that freezing parking lot, and I cried. Not just because I was angry or embarrassed, but because some dark, poisonous part of me believed he was right. Believed that maybe my English really wasn't good enough, that maybe I didn't belong in this country, that maybe I was a fraud who had fooled everyone for 3 years and had finally been exposed. But here is what I did not know then, what I could not possibly have known as I sat there sobbing with my cardboard box on my lap. I did not know that I was about to become a symbol, a test case, a woman who would take on a corporation and win, not for revenge. Not even for the money, but because sometimes, just sometimes, justice actually tastes sweet when you've earned it through blood and tears and the sheer stubborn refusal to give up. This is the story of how I got fired for my English and how I won a lawsuit that changed my life. And if you have ever felt like your voice didn't matter, if you have ever been made to feel small because of the way you speak, if you have ever wondered whether fighting back is worth it, then stay with me, because I am going to tell you exactly how it happened, and I promise you, the ending is worth waiting for. The job I loved. Let me take you back, way back, before the parking lot tears, and the cardboard box, and the humiliation that made me want to disappear. Because to understand why that cold winter morning destroyed me, you have to understand what that job meant to me in the first place. You have to understand the journey that brought me to that glass-walled office with its potted plants and its coffee machine and its promise of a better life. When I first came to America, I was not Elena the content coordinator. I was not even Elena the writer. I was just Elena, the immigrant. The woman with 2 suitcases and a toddler and a husband who looked terrified but tried to hide it. The woman who had left behind everything familiar. Family, friends, a language she spoke without thinking, a culture she understood without effort, to chase a dream that felt both impossibly huge and terrifyingly fragile. We arrived in California on a rainy Tuesday, and I remember stepping off the plane and feeling like I had entered a movie set. Everything was bigger, brighter, louder, faster, and I was just a small character trying to find her place in the script. My husband, who had been an architect in Vietnam, started washing dishes at a restaurant, and I started cleaning houses. And let me tell you something about cleaning houses for a living. It is honest work, it is hard work, and there is absolutely no shame in it. But when you have a bachelor's degree in communications, when you have spent years studying how to write and how to tell stories and how to connect with people, scrubbing someone else's toilet while they are at their office job making 10 times what you make, it does something to your soul. It makes you feel invisible. It makes you feel like all that education, all that effort, all that dreaming was for nothing. I cleaned houses for 2 years. 2 years of kneeling on floors that were not mine. 2 years of breathing in bleach and pretending I was grateful for the opportunity. And I was grateful, truly I was, because it paid the rent, and it fed my son, and it kept us from falling apart. But I was not happy. I was surviving. And there is a difference between surviving and living that I am not sure I understood until I got that job. Then one day, I saw a job posting that made my heart stop. A marketing firm in the city was looking for a content coordinator. Someone with writing skills, someone who understood social media, someone with a creative mind who could help tell their story. And I read that listing about 100 times because I could not believe it existed. I could not believe that someone would actually pay me to write, to create, to do the thing I had been trained to do and love to do. I applied without telling my husband because I was afraid of getting my hopes up. I spent 3 days crafting my resume. I asked a friend to help me with a cover letter because my English still felt shaky, and I submitted it with trembling fingers. Not expecting anything, just hoping, just praying, just putting one foot in front of the other, because that is what you do when you are an immigrant and you have no safety net. And then they call me back. They actually called me back. And I remember screaming so loudly that my toddler ran into the room thinking something terrible had happened, but nothing terrible had happened. Something wonderful had happened. Something miraculous had happened, and I felt like I had won the lottery. The interview was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. There were 3 people in the room, and they asked me questions so fast I could barely keep up. My English was a disaster. I stumbled over words. I paused mid-sentence. I gave answers that were awkward and incomplete. And I walked out of that interview thinking I had blown it completely, thinking they would never hire someone who sounded like me. But here's the thing, I had brought my portfolio, I had brought examples of my writing, articles I had written in both English and Vietnamese, creative pieces that showed my voice and my style, and someone in that room, I never found out who looked past my accent and saw my potential. I got the job, I actually got the job, and when they called to tell me, I cried so hard I could not speak, and my husband thought someone had died. But no one had died. I had been reborn. I had been given a chance to be more than just invisible. And I promised myself right then that I would work harder than anyone had ever worked, that I would prove myself every single day, that I would never give them a reason to regret taking a chance on me. My first boss was a woman named Mrs. Davenport, and she was everything you could hope for in a manager. She was patient, she was encouraging. She told me that my accent was not a weakness, but a strength, that my unique perspective made my writing special, that I brought something to the team that no one else could, and I believed her because she gave me every reason to believe. She praised my work publicly. She gave me challenging assignments that stretched my abilities. She treated me like I mattered. And I would have followed her into battle. I would have done anything for her because she saw me when others looked right through me. Davenport, I thrived. I wrote blog posts that got thousands of views. I managed social media campaigns that increased engagement by 47%. I came up with creative ideas that made our clients happy. And I felt like I had finally found my place in America, like all the struggle and sacrifice had been worth it, like I belonged. But then Mrs. Davenport left the company. She got recruited by a bigger firm in New York. And I was genuinely happy for her even as I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, because I absolutely knew, that whoever replaced her would not see me the same way, and I was right. Enter Mr. Harrison, a tall, red-faced man with a voice that boomed across the office and a smile that never reached his eyes. And from the moment he walked through the door, I felt something change. The air in the office got colder, the jokes got meaner, the compliments stopped coming, and I became invisible again, but worse than invisible, I became a target. He started with small things, friendly corrections that were actually pointed criticisms, comments about how I should practice my pronunciation in front of the whole team, jokes about how my accent made me sound like I was singing when I talked, and everyone laughed nervously while I smiled through the humiliation, because what else could I do? If I protested, I would prove his point. If I got upset, I would be labeled oversensitive. If I said anything at all, my words would be twisted against me. And so I stayed quiet. I stayed professional. I stayed invisible. But inside I was dying. Inside I was screaming. Inside I was wondering if I had made a terrible mistake coming to this country, if I would ever truly belong, if I would always be the outsider who was tolerated but never accepted. But here is the thing I did not know then, the thing that would change everything. I had a secret weapon. Something I had been doing without even realizing it. Something that would become my salvation. And that secret was my little notebook. The one I kept in my desk drawer where I documented every comment, every joke, every humiliation. Every time someone told me I was not American enough or I should go back to where I came from, because I am a writer, and writers are trained to notice things, to record things, to collect pain like other people collect stamps. And I wrote it all down without knowing why, without planning to use it, just because I needed to put my pain somewhere outside of myself. Just because I needed to make sense of what was happening to me. And I had no idea that this notebook would one day become the evidence that would win me a lawsuit, that would prove in a court of law what I had known all along, that what was happening to me was not just unfair, it was illegal. I did not know that when I wrote down Mr. Harrison's comment about how I should go back to where I came from, I was creating a record that a jury would see. That when I recorded the date and time of every joke made at my accent's expense, I was building a case that would make a corporation accountable. That when I noted every promotion I was passed over for, every assignment I was excluded from, every time I was treated differently from my native English-speaking colleagues, I was constructing a timeline of discrimination that no lawyer could ignore. But that all came later, much later, after I had been fired, after I had hit rock bottom, after I had given up and gotten back up again, after I had decided that I was done being a victim, that I was done being invisible, that I was done letting people like Mr. Harrison define my worth. For now, all I had was my job, the job I loved, the job I had worked so hard to get. The job that gave me purpose and identity and a reason to get up in the morning. And I was about to lose it all because my English was not good enough, because my accent was a problem, because someone in a position of power decided I did not belong. And I want you to think about that for a moment, because if you have ever been in a similar situation, if you have ever been made to feel like your voice did not matter because of how you sound, then you know exactly how I felt. You know the helplessness, the rage, the shame, the desperate desire to prove them wrong, and you also know the fear, the deep, primal fear that maybe, just maybe, they are right. The language barrier. Let me paint you a picture of what it actually feels like to work in an American office when English is not your first language. Because I think a lot of people imagine it's just about memorizing vocabulary and practicing grammar, but it is so much more than that. It is an exhausting, constant, never-ending battle that happens inside your head every single second of every single day, while everyone around you just goes about their business, without thinking twice. Imagine you are in a meeting with 12 people, and the conversation is moving at lightning speed. People are talking over each other, throwing out acronyms and jargon and cultural references that you have never heard before, and you are sitting there with a smile on your face, nodding along like you understand everything. But inside your brain is running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, trying to translate what you just heard into your native language, process the meaning, figure out how to respond, translate your response back into English, and then find the right moment to speak. But by the time you have done all of that, the conversation has moved on to 3 different topics, and you have missed your chance entirely. That was my reality every single day at work, and I cannot tell you how exhausting it was, how much mental energy it consumed, how by the end of the day I would come home and collapse on the couch because my brain felt like it had been running a marathon. Not because the work itself was physically demanding, but because the act of communicating in a second language is a cognitive workout that native speakers simply do not understand. The funny thing is, when you speak English as a second language, people judge you based on your mistakes. They hear a wrong verb tense or a mispronounced word, and they assume you are less intelligent, less capable, less competent. But here's what they do not see. They do not see the thousands of hours you spent studying, the flashcards you memorized, the grammar rules you learned, the vocabulary you practiced. They do not see the courage it takes to open your mouth and speak when you know you might make a mistake. And they absolutely do not see the way your heart races every time you have to make a phone call, or give a presentation, or ask a question in front of a group. I remember one particular meeting that still makes me cringe when I think about it. Mr. Harrison had called a team meeting to discuss a new project, and he went around the room asking each person for their input, and when it was my turn, I opened my mouth and said something that came out completely wrong. I meant to say we should focus on engagement metrics. But instead I said something like, we should focus on engagement meetings, and everyone in the room laughed. Not a mean laugh, but a confused laugh, and Mr. Harrison looked at me with that condescending expression he had perfected and said, Elena, why don't you write down your ideas and send them to me later? It might be easier for everyone that way. It might be easier for everyone, he said, as if I was a burden, as if my voice was a problem to be solved, as if I did not deserve to participate in the conversation like everyone else, and I felt my face turn red. I felt my eyes start to sting. And I nodded and said okay, because what else could I say? What could I possibly do except smile and pretend it did not hurt? But that is the thing about being an immigrant in a professional setting. You learn to smile through the pain. You learn to laugh at jokes that are made at your expense. You learn to apologize for things that are not your fault. You learn to make yourself small so that other people can feel big, and you tell yourself that it is temporary, that things will get better. That if you just work hard enough and prove yourself enough, people will eventually see past your accent and recognize your value. Except that is not how it works, is it? Because the more you prove yourself, the more people expect, the more they demand, the more they find things to criticize, and no matter how much you improve, no matter how fluent you become, there is always someone ready to remind you that you are not really American, that you are not really one of them. That you are just a visitor in their country who should be grateful to be allowed in the door. My coworkers were mostly nice. Mostly there was James who shared his lunch with me and helped me understand office slang. There was Sarah who corrected my grammar in a kind way when no one else was listening, but there was also Mike, and Mike was a problem. Because Mike loved to point out my mistakes in front of everyone. He would say things like, Elena, it's I have been working, not I have working. You really need to practice your tenses. And he would say it loudly so that everyone could hear, and then he would wink at Mr. Harrison as if they were sharing a private joke, as if I was the punchline, as if my struggle was entertainment. And I would smile and say thank you. I would thank him for correcting me because that is what I had been taught to do, to be grateful for feedback, to be humble, to not make waves. But inside I was seething. Inside I was screaming. Inside I was thinking about how Mike spoke exactly one language and could barely write a grammatically correct email, but he was American. And that was enough. That was all that mattered. The worst part was the phone calls, because on the phone people could not see your face, could not see your body language. I would have to call clients to discuss campaigns or answer questions, and I could hear the hesitation in their voices when I introduced myself. I could hear the doubt. I could hear them thinking, is this person competent enough to handle my account? And sometimes they would ask to speak to someone else, someone with a clear voice, they would say, and I would transfer the call to Mr. Harrison and feel like a failure, feel like I was letting everyone down, feel like I would never be good enough no matter how hard I tried. But here is the thing I am realizing now. The thing I did not realize then, the problem was never really my English. The problem was a culture that equates accent with intelligence, a culture that punishes difference, a culture that expects immigrants to assimilate completely while simultaneously reminding them they will never truly belong. My English was actually quite good. I could write eloquently, I could express complex ideas, I could read and understand sophisticated material. But my accent was noticeable, and in the eyes of people like Mr. Harrison and Mike, that made me less than, that made me a problem. That made me someone who could be fired and replaced with someone who sounded more American. The irony is that America is a country of immigrants, a country built by people who came from somewhere else. A country where almost everyone's ancestors spoke a different language at some point, but somehow, somewhere along the way, we forgot that. We forgot that the beauty of this country is supposed to be its diversity. We forgot that different accents and different perspectives are supposed to be strengths, not weaknesses. And we started treating anyone who sounds different as a threat, as someone who does not belong. I think about that now, as I sit here telling you the story, and I wonder how many other people have experienced what I experienced. How many other immigrants have been fired or passed over for promotion or treated as less than because of the way they speak? How many other people have swallowed their pride and smiled through the humiliation because they needed the job, because they had families to support, because they could not afford to rock the boat, because they were too afraid to fight back? And I think about the notebook I kept, the notebook where I documented every comment, every joke, every humiliation. And I wonder if other people are doing the same thing, if other people are collecting their pain and waiting for the right moment to use it, or if most people just give up, just accept that this is how things are. Just go back to where they came from and pretend America was never their dream. I almost gave up. I came so close after I was fired, after I sat in that parking lot with my cardboard box and my tears. I almost bought a plane ticket back to Vietnam. I almost admitted defeat. I almost let them win, but something stopped me. Something inside me said, no, you have come too far. You have sacrificed too much. You have worked too hard to let these people destroy your dream. And that something, that small, stubborn voice, that was the beginning of everything that came next. That was the seed of the lawsuit, the seed of the victory, the seed of the justice that would taste so sweet when I finally got it. Because here is the truth, a truth I learned the hard way, a truth I want you to carry with you. Your English is not a weakness, it is a superpower. Every language you speak makes you smarter, more creative, more resilient, more capable of seeing the world from multiple perspectives. And anyone who tells you otherwise, anyone who tries to make you feel small because of your accent, they are not your enemy. They are just a person who has never had to work as hard as you have. A person who will never understand the strength it takes to build a life in a foreign language. A person who does not deserve to define your worth. I did not know any of this when I was sitting in that meeting room with my face burning and my eyes stinging. I did not know that I was building resilience, that I was collecting evidence, that I was preparing myself for a fight that would change my life. All I knew was that I was tired, so tired of pretending, so tired of smiling. Every moment of pain was a brick in the foundation of the woman I would become, the woman who would walk into a courtroom and speak her truth and win. And I want you to hold on to that if you're struggling right now, if you are tired of being judged, tired of being overlooked, tired of feeling like your voice does not matter. Please know that you are not alone. that your struggle is real and valid, and that one day, if you keep going, if you keep believing in yourself, you might just surprise everyone, including yourself, with what you can achieve. Culture shock at work. Let me tell you something that nobody warned me about before I moved to America. Something that no English textbook or language app could have prepared me for. And that is the fact that language is only half the battle when you are trying to succeed in a foreign workplace, because the other half, the half that nobody talks about, is culture, the unspoken rules, the invisible expectations. Through embarrassment, through countless moments of saying or doing the wrong thing without even realizing it until you see the look on someone's face and know you have made a mistake. American workplace culture is a strange and wonderful and absolutely bewildering thing when you come from a different background, because everything is different. The way people communicate, the way they give feedback, the way they build relationships, the way they handle conflict, the way they make decisions, and if you do not understand these cultural codes, you will struggle no matter how fluent your English is, no matter how perfect your grammar, no matter how many vocabulary words you have memorized. I learned this lesson the hard way, over and over again, through a series of humiliations that left me confused and frustrated and wondering if I would ever figure out how to navigate this strange new world. Let me give you an example. In Vietnam, where I grew up, the workplace is hierarchical. You show respect to your elders and your superiors. You do not challenge your boss openly. You do not offer your opinion unless you are asked. You defer to those in positions of authority. And you communicate indirectly, using subtle hints and suggestions rather than direct statements, because directness is considered rude, aggressive, disrespectful. But in America, it is the opposite. American workplaces value directness. They want you to speak up. They want you to share your ideas. They want you to challenge the status quo. They see quiet deference as a weakness, as a lack of confidence, as evidence that you do not have anything valuable to contribute, and I did not understand this at first. I thought I was being respectful by staying quiet and waiting to be asked, but my coworkers thought I was being passive. They thought I had nothing to say. They thought I was not engaged. And I could see the frustration on their faces when I would sit in meetings and say nothing while everyone else was throwing out ideas left and right. Then there was the feedback culture, which was perhaps the biggest shock of all, because in Vietnam, feedback is given privately and gently. You do not criticize someone in front of others. You do not point out mistakes publicly. You save face for everyone involved. But in America, feedback is direct. It is honest, it is often public, and people expect you to take it in stride without getting defensive or emotional. I remember the first time someone gave me negative feedback in front of the whole team. It was Mr. Harrison, of course, and he said, "Elena, your report was not up to our standards. The data was incomplete and the analysis was superficial. You need to do better next time." And he said this in a meeting with 15 people, and I felt my face turn red. I felt my eyes start to sting. I felt like I wanted to disappear into the floor, but everyone else just nodded and moved on like it was normal, like it was no big deal. And I realized that in American culture, this is just how they do things. They do not see it as rude or disrespectful. They see it as honest and helpful, but to me it felt like a public shaming, and I walked out of that meeting feeling like a failure. Another thing that surprised me was how informal American workplaces can be. People call their bosses by their first names. They joke around. They talk about their personal lives. They share stories about their weekends and their families and their hobbies. And this informality extends to meetings and emails and everyday interactions in ways that felt strange and uncomfortable to me at first. Because in my culture, you maintain a certain distance, a certain formality. You do not mix business with personal. You do not get too familiar with your superiors. You keep things professional and separate. But in America, the line between professional and personal is blurry, and if you do not participate in that informality, you are seen as cold, aloof. unfriendly, not a team player, and I struggled with this because I was not comfortable sharing my personal life with people I barely knew. I was not comfortable making jokes with my boss. I was not comfortable with the casual banter that seemed to be such an important part of office culture. Then there was the issue of assertiveness, which is perhaps the most important cultural difference of all because in America, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to ask for what you want. You have to promote your achievements. You have to make sure people know what you have accomplished because no one is going to do it for you. And this was very difficult for me because in my culture, humility is valued. You do not boast. You do not draw attention to yourself. You let your work speak for itself, and you trust that others will recognize your contributions without you having to point them out. But in America, if you do not speak up, if you do not highlight your achievements, you will be overlooked, you will be passed over for promotions. You will be seen as someone who is not ambitious, not driven, not leadership material, and I watched as my coworkers, many of whom were less qualified and less hardworking than me, got promoted ahead of me because they knew how to play the game. They knew how to talk themselves up. They knew how to make sure the right people noticed their contributions. And I just kept my head down and worked hard and hoped that someone would notice, but no one did because in America, hope is not a strategy. I remember one performance review where Mr. Harrison told me that I was too quiet and that I needed to speak up more and show more leadership, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I was not quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because I was trying to process everything in my second language. I was quiet because I was afraid of making mistakes. I was quiet because I was from a culture where quietness is a virtue. But I could not explain any of that. I could not make him understand, so I just nodded and said I would try harder. And I walked out of that room feeling like a failure, feeling like no matter how hard I worked, I would never be good enough. The cultural differences extended to my relationships with my coworkers as well. Because I found it difficult to connect with them on a personal level, they talked about things I did not understand. They referenced TV shows I had never seen. They made jokes about American politics and American sports and American holidays that went right over my head. And I would sit there smiling and nodding, pretending to understand, while feeling more and more like an outsider with every passing day. I tried to fit in, I really did. I watched American TV shows so I could understand their references. I learned about American sports so I could participate in the conversations. I celebrated American holidays and tried to embrace American traditions. But no matter how much I learned, no matter how much I adapted, I still felt like I was wearing a costume, like I was pretending to be someone I was not, like I would never truly belong. And the worst part was the loneliness, the profound, aching loneliness of being surrounded by people who were nice to you, but who would never really understand you, who would never know what it was like to leave everything behind and start over in a new country, who would never understand the constant mental effort it took just to get through a normal day, who would never see the tears you cried in the bathroom when no one was watching. I remember one day, after a particularly difficult meeting where I had stumbled over my words and felt everyone's judgmental eyes on me, I went into the bathroom and locked myself in a stall and cried, not loud sobs, but silent tears that rolled down my cheeks and dripped onto my blouse, and I asked myself why I had come to this country, why I had put myself through this, why I had thought I could ever belong in a place where everything was so different, so foreign, so unwelcoming. But then I thought about my family, about my husband and my son, about all the sacrifices we had made to be here, about the life we were building, about the opportunities that America offered that we could never have back home, and I wiped my tears, fixed my makeup, and walked back out to my desk and pretended that everything was fine because that is what you do when you are an immigrant. You keep going. You keep smiling. You keep pretending that everything is okay even when you are falling apart inside. Looking back now, I realized that the cultural challenges I faced were not my fault. They were not a sign of my inadequacy. They were just a reflection of the immense difficulty of navigating a completely different culture while trying to do your job and support your family and maintain your dignity. And I think that anyone who has ever moved to a new country, anyone who has ever tried to build a life in a foreign land, anyone who has ever felt like an outsider looking in will understand exactly what I am talking about, will feel that pain in their own hearts, will know that they are not alone. The humiliation. Let me tell you about the day everything changed, the day that went from bad to catastrophic, the day that Mr. could not find a way to pretend it was okay. And looking back now, I realized that this was the moment when something inside me broke. But it was also the moment when something else inside me started to grow, something harder, something angrier, something that would eventually refuse to be silent anymore. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were always the worst. They were the days when we had our big team meetings. The ones where everyone gathered in the conference room, and Mr. Harrison would go around the table asking for updates, and the whole office could hear you if you stumbled over your words. The whole office could judge you if you made a mistake. The whole office could see your face turn red when you were called out. And I always dreaded Tuesdays. I would wake up with a knot in my stomach, and I would drink my coffee too fast, and I would try to prepare myself mentally for the ordeal ahead. But no amount of preparation could have prepared me for what happened on that particular Tuesday. The meeting started out normally enough. We were discussing a new client campaign, and people were throwing out ideas, some good, some terrible. And I listened and I took notes and I waited for my turn, and when it came, I took a deep breath and I started to share my idea. An idea I had been working on for weeks. An idea I was genuinely proud of, an idea that I thought could actually make a difference for the client. I spoke slowly and carefully, making sure to pronounce each word correctly, making sure to use the right grammar, making sure to structure my sentences clearly, and I thought I was doing okay. I thought I was holding my own. I thought maybe this time would be different, but then I made a mistake, a small mistake, a tiny mistake. I mispronounced one word, just one, and Mr. Harrison jumped on it like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Elena," he said, interrupting me mid-sentence. "Elena, stop right there. Did you just say refer instead of prefer? Because those are two completely different words, and if you cannot even pronounce basic vocabulary correctly, how can we trust you to communicate with our clients?" And he laughed, he actually laughed, and then he looked around the room and said, "Everyone, I want you to notice how Elena is still struggling with her English, and this is someone who has been working here for 3 years. 3 years, and she still cannot say prefer correctly. What are we paying her for?" And the room was silent. Completely silent. No one laughed, no one defended me, no one said a word. They just looked at their desks, looked at their notes, looked anywhere but at me, and I felt my face burning. I felt my eyes stinging. I felt like I was suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I could not speak. I could not defend myself. I could not even breathe because the humiliation was so complete, so total, so devastating that I thought I might actually pass out. Mr. Harrison was not finished. He was just getting started. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Elena, maybe you should consider taking some English classes. I could recommend some, because this is becoming a real problem for the team. We cannot have someone representing our company who cannot speak properly. It makes us look unprofessional. It makes us look like we don't care about quality. And frankly, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for all of us." And I sat there and took it. I sat there with my hands trembling under the table and my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears, and my throat so tight I could barely swallow. And I said nothing. I said absolutely nothing, because what could I possibly say? What could I possibly do except sit there and absorb the abuse and wait for it to be over, wait for the meeting to end, wait for the moment when I could escape to the bathroom and cry in private. When the meeting finally ended, I gathered my things and walked out as calmly as I could. I kept my head down. I did not make eye contact with anyone. I just walked to the bathroom and locked myself in the stall, and I cried. I cried so hard I could not breathe. I cried until my eyes were swollen and my face was blotchy and my chest hurt from the sobs. And I asked myself over and over again why I was putting myself through this, why I had come to this country, why I had thought I could make it, why I had ever believed that hard work and dedication would be enough, because clearly they were not enough. Clearly I would never be enough. Clearly I was just a joke to these people, a punchline, a problem to be solved. And I thought about all the things I wanted to say to Mr. Harrison, all the things I wished I had said in that meeting. I wished I had told him that I speak 3 languages fluently while he barely speaks 1. I wished I had told him that my English is not a weakness, but a strength. That I have to work harder than anyone in that room just to be mediocre in their eyes. I wished I had told him that I am not embarrassing. He is embarrassing. He is embarrassing for treating another human being with such cruelty, such contempt, such complete lack of basic human decency. But I had not said any of that. I had sat there like a frightened child and taken it, and the shame of that, the shame of my silence, was almost worse than the humiliation itself. After I had cried all the tears I had, I washed my face, I fixed my makeup, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I said out loud, "You are not going to quit, you are not going to give up, you are going to survive this, you have survived worse than this, you will survive this too." And I walked back to my desk, and I sat down, and I stared at my computer screen without seeing anything, because my brain was still replaying the scene, still hearing his voice, still feeling the heat of everyone's eyes on me. And I knew that I had to do something. I knew that I could not just let this go. I knew that if I did not stand up for myself, no one else ever would. That night, I went home and I told my husband what had happened, and I expected him to be angry, to be outraged, to tell me to quit, to tell me we would find another way. But instead he looked at me with such sadness in his eyes and he said, "Elena, you deserve better. You deserve to be treated with respect. You should not have to endure this. No one should have to endure this." And I started crying again. Not from humiliation this time, but from the relief of being seen, of being understood, of being loved. And I realized that even if the whole world treated me like I did not matter, my family saw me, my family valued me, my family would never let me forget that I was worthy. But I also realized that love alone was not enough. I needed to take action. I needed to do something. I needed to fight back, because if I did not, if I just let this slide like I had let everything else slide, then nothing would ever change. I would always be the victim. I would always be the one who took the abuse and smiled and pretended it was fine, and I was so tired of pretending. So exhausted from the constant effort of making myself small so that other people could feel big. That night, I took out my little notebook, the one I had been keeping for years, and I opened it to a fresh page, and I wrote down everything that had happened in that meeting. Every word Mr. Harrison had said, every look on every face, every detail I could remember, and as I wrote, I felt something shifting inside me, something hardening, something resolving. I felt the fear starting to be replaced by anger, and the anger starting to be replaced by determination. And I knew that I was not going to let this go. I was not going to just move on and pretend it did not happen. I was going to do something. I was going to make sure that Mr. Harrison and everyone like him knew that they could not treat people this way, that there were consequences for cruelty, that justice was possible even for someone like me. But I still did not know what that would look like. I did not know if I had the strength to actually follow through. I did not know if I could face the battle that lay ahead. I only knew that something had changed, something fundamental had shifted inside me. And I would never be the same person who sat in that meeting and said nothing. I would never be the person who let the abuse slide. I would never be the person who made herself small to make others feel big. and that was the beginning of everything. That was the moment when I started to become the person who would walk into a courtroom and speak her truth and win. Hitting rock bottom. Let me tell you about the days that followed the humiliation, the days when I hit rock bottom in a way I had never experienced before. Not when I first arrived in America with 2 suitcases and a toddler, not when I was cleaning houses and scrubbing toilets. Not when I was struggling to pay the rent or worrying about whether we would have enough food, because those were hard times, yes. But they were also hopeful times. They were times when I believed that if I just worked hard enough, things would get better, but this was different. This was the death of hope. This was the moment when I stopped believing that hard work would be rewarded. When I stopped believing that America was the land of opportunity. When I stopped believing that I could ever truly belong. I was fired 3 days after that meeting, 3 days after Mr. Harrison had publicly humiliated me, 3 days after I had sat in that conference room and taken his abuse without saying a word. And he called me into his office on a Friday afternoon, right before the weekend, because that is when they always do it. When they know you have nowhere to go, when they know you will spend the entire weekend stewing in your misery. And he said, "Elena, we have decided to let you go. Your English skills are not up to our standards. And we need someone who can communicate more effectively with our clients. It's nothing personal, it's just business." "It's nothing personal," he said, as if he had not just spent months and years treating me like I was less than human. As if he had not made jokes at my expense in front of the entire team. As if he had not humiliated me in ways that would scar me forever. As if my entire life, my entire future, my entire family's well-being was not riding on this job. And I sat there, and I took it. I sat there, and I nodded and I said, "Okay," because my English failed me again, because I could not find the words to fight back. Because I was so shocked, so devastated, so completely broken, that I could not even speak. I walked out of his office. I walked past my coworkers who looked down at their desks and pretended not to see me. I walked past James, who had shared his lunch with me, and Sarah, who had helped me with my grammar, and Mike, who had made jokes at my expense. And I walked to my car, and I sat there, and I stared at the steering wheel, and I felt nothing. I felt absolutely nothing. Because the pain was so great that my brain had shut down, had gone numb, had protected me from the full impact of what had just happened. And I drove home in a daze. I drove home without really seeing the road, without really knowing how I got there. And when I walked through the door of our small apartment, my husband took one look at my face, and he knew immediately what had happened. And he put his arms around me, and he held me while I cried, while I sobbed, while I fell apart in a way I had never fallen apart before. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. I stopped eating, I stopped sleeping. I stopped doing anything except lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, replaying every humiliation, every comment, every moment of pain over and over in my head like a broken record, and I asked myself the same question over and over again. Why did I come to this country? Why did I leave everything I knew? Why did I think I could make it here? Why did I believe that hard work would be enough? Why did I think I could ever belong in a place where people like me are not welcome? I stopped looking for jobs. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped opening the mail. I just lay in bed and let the darkness consume me. And I felt like a failure. I felt like a fraud. I felt like everything I had ever believed about myself was a lie. Because I had come to America with dreams of success, and instead I had ended up broken, humiliated, and fired, all because of the way I spoke. All because of my accent. All because I was not American enough. My husband tried to help me. He brought me food I would not eat. He tried to talk to me, but I would not listen. He told me we would figure it out. We would find a way. We would survive. But I did not believe him. I did not believe in anything anymore. I had given everything I had to this country, and it had spit me out. It had used me and discarded me like I was nothing, and I was so tired, so exhausted from the constant effort of trying to be enough, trying to fit in, trying to prove myself, and I just wanted to give up. I just wanted to go home. I just wanted to go back to Vietnam, where I spoke the language without thinking, where I understood the culture without effort, where I belonged without having to prove anything to anyone. I remember one night I was lying in bed, and I heard my husband and my son in the other room. My son was asking where his mother was, why she was so sad, why she never played with him anymore, and my husband was trying to explain, trying to find the words to tell a 4-year-old that his mother was broken, that she had lost her spirit, that she might never get it back. And I listened to their voices, and I felt this crushing weight of guilt on my chest, because I was not just failing myself, I was failing them. I was failing the people I loved most in the world, and that was the moment when something inside me shifted. When I realized that I could not stay in this darkness forever, that I had people who depended on me, people who believed in me, people who loved me. And I had a choice. I could stay in that bed and let the darkness consume me, or I could get up and fight. And I chose to fight. I got out of bed, I walked into the living room, and I sat down next to my son, and I hugged him, and I told him that I was sorry. That I was so sorry for being sad, for being distant, for not being there for him. And he looked at me with those big innocent eyes, and he said, "Mommy, are you okay?" And I said, Baby, I will be okay, I promise." And I made a promise to myself in that moment, a promise that I would not give up, that I would not let them win, that I would find a way to fight back, to stand up for myself, to show the world that I was not someone who could be broken so easily. I started looking for a lawyer. I knew that what had happened to me was illegal. I knew that discrimination based on national origin was against the law. I knew that Mr. Harrison had crossed a line, and I was determined to make him pay for it. Not for revenge, not for money, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was not powerless, that I was not a victim, that I could stand up and fight for what was right. It was not easy. I called lawyer after lawyer, and many of them turned me down. They said the case was too hard, the evidence was too thin, the company was too big. They said I should just move on, just find another job, just let it go, but I did not let it go. I kept calling, kept searching, kept believing that somewhere out there was someone who would believe in me, someone who would see the injustice and want to help. And eventually, I found that person. Eventually, I found a lawyer who looked at my case and said, "This is wrong. What they did to you is wrong. And I'm going to help you fight them." And when he said that, I started crying, not tears of sadness this time, but tears of relief, tears of hope, tears of the first glimmer of light in a darkness that had seemed endless. My family's love. Let me tell you about the people who saved my life, who pulled me out of that darkness when I had given up on everything, who reminded me that I was not just a worker, not just an employee, not just a victim, but a mother, a wife, a human being with value that no job and no boss could ever take away from me. And that is my family, my husband and my son. The two people who looked at me when I was at my absolute lowest and said, "We believe in you, we love you, and we are not going to let you give up." My husband, whose name is Min, is the quietest, strongest person I have ever known. He never complained when we left everything behind and came to America. He never complained when he had to wash dishes while I cleaned houses. He never complained when we struggled to pay the bills and had to count every penny. He just worked and he loved us, and he never, ever stopped believing that things would get better. And when I was lying in bed those dark weeks after I was fired, he did not push me. He did not pressure me. He did not tell me to snap out of it. He just sat with me. He held my hand. He brought me tea I did not drink and food I did not eat. And he waited for me to find my way back. He waited for me to remember who I was. And that patience, that unconditional love, that was what eventually reached me in that dark place where I had been hiding. And then there was my son, my beautiful little boy who was only 4 years old when all of this happened, too young to understand why his mother was so sad, too young to understand the complexities of discrimination and lawsuits and workplace humiliation, but old enough to know that something was wrong, old enough to feel the absence of my laughter, old enough to miss the way I used to play with him and read to him and sing him songs before bedtime. And I remember one night, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling like I had done for weeks, and I heard his little footsteps coming down the hall. And he climbed onto the bed and he snuggled up next to me and he said, "Mommy, are you sick?" And I said, "No, baby, I'm not sick." And he said, "Then why are you so sad? Did someone hurt you?" And I could not answer him because I did not want to tell him the truth. I did not want to tell him that yes, someone had hurt me. Someone had made me feel like I was worthless. Someone had taken my job and my dignity and my hope, but I also did not want to lie to him. So I just hugged him and I said, "I'm okay, baby, I'm going to be okay, I promise." And in that moment, I realized that I could not keep making promises I was not sure I could not keep lying to my son and my husband and myself. I had to actually get better. I had to actually fight back. I had to actually become the person I was pretending to be. The next morning I got out of bed, I took a shower, I put on real clothes, not pajamas. And I sat down at the kitchen table and I told Min that I was ready to fight, that I was not going to let Mr. Harrison and everyone like him get away with what they had done, that I was going to find a lawyer and I was going to sue them and I was going to win. And he looked at me with such relief in his eyes, such hope, such love, and he said, "I've been waiting for you to say that. I've been waiting for you to come back to me. I knew you would. I never doubted you." And I cried again, but this time they were good tears. They were tears of gratitude, tears of release, tears of the first real hope I had felt in months. But here is the thing about being a mother and a wife while fighting a legal battle. It is not just about you anymore. It is about them. Every decision I made, every step I took, every risk I considered, I had to think about what it would mean for my family, what it would mean if I lost, what it would mean if we ran out of money before the case was resolved, what it would mean if my son had to see his mother fail yet again, and that pressure, that responsibility, that weight of knowing that other people were depending on me, that was both a burden and a gift. A burden because it made everything harder. A gift because it gave me a reason to keep going when I wanted to give up. I remember one particularly hard day. I had been rejected by 3 more lawyers. They had all said the same thing, that my case was too difficult, that the company was too big, that I did not have enough evidence, and I came home feeling so defeated, so hopeless, so convinced that I would never find anyone to help me, and I sat down on the couch, and I started to cry. And my son came over, and he put his little hand on my face and he said, "Mommy, don't cry, I love you." And he gave me a kiss on the cheek. And I realized in that moment that even if I never won the lawsuit, even if I never got my job back, even if I never found a lawyer who believed in me, I had already won the most important thing. I had won the love of this little boy. I had won the devotion of my husband. I had won a family that would never give up on me no matter what happened. And that gave me strength, that gave me courage, that gave me the determination to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing that somewhere out there was a lawyer who would take my case, someone who would see the injustice and want to help. And I made a promise to myself in that moment, a promise that I would not stop until I found that person, that I would not give up until I had done everything I could to fight for justice, not just for myself, but for my son, so that one day he would look back and know that his mother fought, that his mother did not let bullies win, that his mother stood up for what was right even when it was hard. And I think about all the immigrant families out there who are going through something similar. All the parents who are struggling to make a life in a new country. All the children who are watching their parents fight and sacrifice and never give up. and I want you to know that your children see you. They see everything. They see the tears you cry when you think they are not looking. They see the exhaustion in your eyes. They see the way you keep going even when you want to stop, and that is the greatest gift you can ever give them. Not money, not success, not a perfect life, but the example of resilience, the lesson that no matter how hard things get, you do not give up, you fight, you keep going. You believe that things will get better. My son is older now, he is in school, and he has started to understand more about what happened to his mother. He knows that I was treated unfairly because of the way I speak. He knows that I fought back and won, and he is so proud of me. He tells everyone that his mom is a fighter, that his mom won a lawsuit, that his mom is the strongest person he knows. And that makes all the struggle worth it. That makes every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt worth it. Because I know that I am teaching him something that no school ever could. I am teaching him that injustice should not be tolerated. That you have to stand up for yourself and for others. That even when the odds are against you, you can still win if you refuse to give up. I also think about my husband, who worked 2 jobs while I was fighting this battle, who never complained, who never asked me to stop, who never made me feel guilty for the money we were spending on lawyers, who just supported me, believed in me, loved me. And I know that I could not have done any of this without him. He was my rock, my anchor, my reason to keep going, and I am so grateful, so incredibly grateful that I have someone like him in my life, someone who sees me not as an immigrant with an accent, but as a person with dreams and courage and the determination to make those dreams come true. So if you are watching this, and you are going through something hard, something that feels impossible, something that makes you want to give up, please remember that you are not alone. You have people who love you, people who believe in you, people who are rooting for you even when you cannot see them, and that love is the most powerful weapon you have. It is stronger than any boss, any company, any discrimination, and it will carry you through the darkest moments if you let it. The lawyer who believed. Let me tell you about the moment when everything started to change, the moment when I found someone who actually believed in me, someone who looked at my story and did not see a hopeless immigrant with a weak case, but saw injustice, saw discrimination, saw a fight worth winning, and that person was a lawyer named Mr. Thompson, and I will never forget the day I walked into his office because it was the day I stopped being a victim and started being a fighter. The day I realized that there were people in this country who actually cared about justice, who were willing to take on powerful corporations on behalf of ordinary people like me, and that realization gave me hope in a way that nothing else had. Finding Mr. Thompson was not easy. It took weeks of calling, weeks of rejections, weeks of being told that my case was too hard, that the company was too big, that I did not have enough evidence, that I should just move on and find another job, and each rejection felt like another knife in my heart. Another confirmation that maybe I really was powerless, maybe I really should just give up, maybe the bullies really had won. And I started to lose hope again, started to sink back into that dark place where I had been before. But then I found a legal aid clinic that offered free consultations, and I went there with my little notebook, the one where I had documented every comment, every joke, every humiliation, and I sat down with a young lawyer who listened to my story, who looked through my notebook, who asked me questions, and who said, "This is wrong. What they did to you is wrong, and I think you have a case. But I specialize in immigration law, not employment discrimination, so I want to refer you to a colleague of mine who handles cases like this. His name is Mr. Thompson, and he is the best employment discrimination lawyer in the city. If anyone can help you, it's him." I left that clinic with a phone number and a tiny spark of hope, a spark that I was afraid to let grow too big because I had been disappointed so many times before. But I called Mr. Thompson's office. I left a message and I waited. And when he called me back, his voice was kind and professional, and he said, "I hear you have a case. Why don't you come in and tell me about it? Let's see what we can do." I went to his office on a rainy Tuesday. It was raining the day I was fired, and it was raining the day I met the lawyer who would change my life. And I took that as a sign that this was a new beginning, that the rain was washing away the old and making way for the new. And I walked into his office with my notebook and my trembling hands and my racing heart, and I told him everything. I told him about Mr. Harrison, about the jokes, about the humiliation, about the meeting where he mocked me in front of everyone, about the firing, about the parking lot, about the tears, about the darkness. And I gave him my notebook. I gave him years of documentation, years of pain recorded in my own handwriting. And he read through it page by page, and when he looked up, I saw something in his eyes that I had not seen in a long time. I saw belief. I saw conviction. I saw a man who was ready to fight. "Elena," he said, "this is a strong case. You have documented everything. You have witnesses. You have a pattern of discrimination that is very clear, and I want you to know that I am going to help you. I am going to fight for you. And I think we have a real chance of winning." And when he said that, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I felt the first real hope I had felt in months. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay, and I started to cry. But they were not sad tears. They were tears of relief, tears of release, tears of gratitude for this man who had believed in me when no one else would. But here's the thing about fighting a lawsuit. It is not easy, it is not quick, it is not cheap. And it takes a toll on you in ways you cannot even imagine. There were months of depositions, months of paperwork, months of waiting, months of wondering if I had made a mistake, if I was wasting my time and money, if I was putting my family through all of this for nothing. And there were many nights when I would wake up in a cold sweat, terrified that I was going to lose. Terrified that I was going to be humiliated all over again. Terrified that Mr. Harrison would win, and I would be left with nothing but even more pain and failure. And through it all, Mr. Thompson was there. He was patient, he was reassuring, he was honest with me about the risks, but also confident in the case. And he taught me something that I will never forget. He taught me that the legal system, while imperfect, can actually work for ordinary people. That there are laws against discrimination, that there are consequences for breaking those laws. That justice is possible if you are willing to fight for it, and that was a lesson I needed to learn. A lesson that changed the way I saw myself and my place in this country. I also learned that I was not alone, that there were other people who had experienced similar things. Other immigrants who had been treated unfairly because of their accents. Other workers who had been discriminated against because of where they came from, and Mr. Thompson connected me with a support group, a group of people who had gone through employment discrimination and had fought back and won. And hearing their stories gave me strength, gave me hope, gave me the courage to keep going even when things got hard. There was one woman in particular, a woman named Rosa, who had been fired from her job for speaking Spanish in the break room. And she had fought her employer and won, and she told me, "Elena, you are doing the right thing. You are not just fighting for yourself. You are fighting for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of who they are. You are standing up to bullies, and that takes courage. More courage than most people will ever understand." And I will never forget her words, because they reminded me that this was not just about me. This was about something bigger, something more important. This was about sending a message that discrimination would not be tolerated, that people could not treat others unfairly because of their accents or their skin color or where they came from. And that message was worth fighting for, even if it was hard, even if it was painful, even if it took everything I had. Gathering evidence. Let me tell you about the most painful part of the entire legal process, the part where I had to go back through all my memories, all my pain, all my humiliation, and dig up every detail, every date, Every word that had been said to me, every look that had been given to me, every moment I had tried so desperately to forget and put it all down on paper, not just for my own healing, but as evidence, as ammunition, as the foundation of the case that would determine whether I got justice or whether I would be crushed by a corporation that had way more money and way more power than I could ever dream of having. And let me tell you, reliving those moments was like being tortured all over again. It was like having to watch a movie of the worst days of your life on a loop, unable to look away, unable to escape, unable to do anything except feel all the pain and shame and anger as if it was happening for the first time. I had my little notebook, yes, the one I had been keeping for years, the one where I had documented every comment, every joke, every humiliation. But Mr. Thompson told me that I needed more than just my own notes. I needed emails, I needed records, I needed witnesses. I needed to prove that what had happened to me was not just in my head, that it was real, that it was documented, that there was a pattern. And so I started the process of gathering evidence, which meant going through years of emails, years of performance reviews, years of meeting notes, years of everything I had ever saved, and it was exhausting. It was emotionally draining. It was like peeling back layers of pain that I had worked so hard to bury deep inside myself. I remember one evening, sitting at my kitchen table with stacks of papers spread out in front of me, reading through old emails that made my stomach churn, emails where Mr. Harrison had corrected my grammar in the most condescending way possible, emails where he had assigned me less important tasks than my coworkers, emails where he had excluded me from meetings and projects that I should have been part of, and the more I read, the angrier I got. The more I realized that this had been happening for years, that I had been treated unfairly for so long that I had started to believe it was normal, that I had started to believe that I deserved it, that I had started to believe that my English really was the problem, when in reality, the problem was never my English. The problem was a boss who saw my accent as a weakness and exploited it. The problem was a workplace culture that allowed discrimination to thrive. The problem was a system that made it so easy for people like Mr. Harrison to get away with treating others like garbage. And I also had to talk to my former coworkers, the people I had worked alongside for years, the people who had shared their lunches with me and helped me with difficult phrases and sat in meetings with me and watched me be humiliated and never said a word. And I had to ask them if they would be willing to testify on my behalf, if they would be willing to tell the truth about what they had seen and heard. And that was incredibly difficult because most of them were still working at the company. Most of them were afraid of losing their own jobs. Most of them did not want to get involved, and I really did understand why they were scared because I had been scared too, and I could not blame them for feeling the same way, but I also knew that if they did not speak up, if they did not tell the truth, then justice would be impossible, and I would be left with nothing but my own memories and my own pain. There was one coworker, Sarah, who had always been kind to me, who had helped me correct my grammar in a gentle way, who had been one of the few people in that office who treated me like a human being, and when I called her and told her what was happening, when I asked her if she would be willing to testify, she paused for a long time, and I could hear the fear in her silence. I could hear her weighing the risks. I could hear her wondering if she was willing to risk her own job for someone she had worked with but was not really close to. And I held my breath, and I waited, and I prayed, and finally she said, "Elena, I saw what happened. I saw how he treated you. I saw how unfair it was. And I have felt guilty about not saying anything for years, so yes, I will testify. I will tell them what I saw. Because it was wrong, and someone needs to speak up." And when she said that, I started crying. I cried because I was so grateful. I cried because I was so relieved. I cried because I realized that there were good people in the world, people who were willing to do the right thing even when it was hard, people who were willing to stand up against injustice even when it cost them something, and that gave me hope, that gave me the strength to keep going, that made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I actually had a chance. But gathering evidence was not just about talking to people and collecting emails. It was also about facing my own fears, my own shame, my own belief that somehow this was all my fault, that somehow I deserved what had happened to me. Because I had been telling myself that story for so long that I had started to believe it. I had started to believe that if only my English was better, if only I did not have an accent, if only I tried harder, then none of this would have happened. But the more evidence I gathered, the more I realized that was a lie, that none of this was my fault, that I had been the victim of discrimination pure and simple, and that the shame I felt did not belong to me. It belonged to the people who had treated me so cruelly, and that realization was like a light in the darkness. Like a breath of fresh air after being underwater for too long, like finally being able to see clearly after years of squinting through fog. There was also the practical side of gathering evidence, the paperwork, the legal documents, the depositions, the long meetings with Mr. Thompson where we went over every detail, every piece of evidence, every possible argument the other side might make. And those meetings were exhausting. They were long and draining, and sometimes I would leave them feeling like I had been wrung out like a wet towel. But they were also empowering because I was learning, I was understanding the legal system, I was seeing how the law could actually work in my favor. And that knowledge was power. That knowledge was a weapon I could use to fight back against a system that had oppressed me for so long. I remember one particular meeting where Mr. Thompson laid out all the evidence on a big table, emails, notes, witness statements, records of meetings, and he looked at me and he said, "Elena, look at this, look at everything we have. This is not just one incident. This is a pattern. This is a history of discrimination that goes back years. And any reasonable jury is going to see that. Any reasonable person is going to look at this and know that what they did to you is wrong. And I think we have a very strong chance of winning this case." And I looked at that table, at all that evidence spread out in front of me, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt proud. I felt proud of myself for having the foresight to document everything, for having the courage to keep those records even when I was too scared to use them, for having the strength to keep going even when everything in me wanted to give up. And I realized that I was not just a victim anymore. I was a fighter. I was someone who had taken all that pain and turned it into power, all that humiliation and turned it into strength. And that was a beautiful feeling. That was a feeling that made all the struggle, all the pain, all the sleepless nights worth it. The lawsuit begins. Let me tell you about the day I walked into a courtroom. The day I sat across from the man who had humiliated me. The day I looked him in the eye and told my truth to a room full of strangers. Because that day was one of the scariest and most empowering days of my entire life. It was the day I stopped being afraid. The day I took all that pain and anger and turned it into something powerful. The day I realized that my voice, the voice I had been told was not good enough, was actually strong enough to change everything, and I want you to imagine what that feels like. Imagine walking into a room where the person who made your life miserable is sitting there with his expensive lawyer and his confident smile. And you have to stand up and tell the world what he did to you, knowing that he will do everything he can to make you look like a liar, knowing that he will twist your words and attack your credibility and try to make you feel small all over again. But you do it anyway because you have come too far to turn back now. The morning of the first hearing, I woke up at 4 a.m. I could not sleep. My stomach was in knots. My hands were shaking. And I felt like I was going to throw up, but I got dressed. I put on my best suit, the one I had bought for the interview that got me the job I eventually lost. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, "Elena, you have been through worse than this. You have survived humiliation. You have survived discrimination. You have survived being told you are not good enough. And you're still standing. You are still fighting. You are still here. And nothing that happens in that courtroom today can take that away from you. My husband drove me to the courthouse, and he held my hand, and he told me he was proud of me, that no matter what happened, he would always be proud of me, and I held on to those words. I held on to them like a lifeline, because I knew that the next few hours were going to be some of the hardest of my life. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw Mr. Harrison sitting at the defense table with his lawyer, a woman in a very expensive suit who looked like she had never lost a case in her life. And he looked at me and smirked. He actually smirked, like this was all a joke, like I was still the punchline. Like he had no doubt that he would win, and I would be humiliated all over again. And I felt that familiar feeling of fear rising up in my chest. That feeling of wanting to run away, wanting to hide, wanting to disappear. But then I looked at Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, and he nodded at me, and I remembered all the evidence we had gathered, all the emails, all the witness statements, all the years of documentation, and I remembered Sarah, who had agreed to testify, and Rosa, who had told me I was fighting for everyone, and my son, who believed his mother was a hero. And I took a deep breath, and I walked to my seat, and I sat down, and I was ready to fight. The hearing began, and Mr. Thompson stood up and laid out our case. He talked about the years of discrimination, the pattern of behavior, the humiliation, the firing, and he presented our evidence. He showed the emails where Mr. Harrison had corrected my grammar in condescending ways. He showed the performance reviews that were inconsistent and unfair. He showed the documentation I had kept for years, and I watched Mr. Harrison's face change. I watched the smirk disappear and the confidence fade. I watched him realize that I was not the easy target he thought I was. That I had come prepared, that I was not going to just roll over and let him win. And that felt good. That felt really good. Like a tiny taste of the justice I was fighting for. Then it was my turn to testify, and Mr. Harrison's lawyer stood up and started questioning me. She tried to trip me up. She tried to make me sound confused. She tried to make my English work against me. She asked me questions designed to make me stumble. To make me sound like I did not know what I was talking about. To make me look like the incompetent immigrant Mr. Harrison had described, but I had practiced for this. I had prepared. I had Mr. Thompson coaching me, and I answered every question clearly and calmly. I did not let her shake me. I did not let her make me feel small. I spoke slowly and carefully, and I told the truth. I told the truth about everything, and when I was done, I saw something on Mr. Harrison's face that I had never seen before. I saw fear. I saw a man who realized he might actually lose, and that was a beautiful moment. A moment I will never forget, because it was the moment I stopped being afraid of him. The moment I realized that he was just a man. Just a bully who had finally met someone who would not back down. Sarah testified next, and she told the court about the meetings where Mr. Harrison had mocked me, about the comments he had made, about the pattern of behavior that had been so obvious to everyone but had been ignored for too long, and I watched the jury's faces as she spoke. I watched them nod. I watched them listen. I watched them understand, and I knew that our case was strong. I knew that the truth was on our side. And I felt a sense of calm wash over me, a sense that no matter what happened, I had done everything I could. I had spoken my truth. I had stood up for myself, and that was a victory in itself. The trial lasted for several days, and each day was exhausting. Each day was a battle. Each day took everything I had. But I kept going. I kept fighting. I kept believing that justice was possible, and I was surrounded by people who believed in me. My husband was there every day, holding my hand, giving me strength, and there were even some of my former coworkers who came to support me, who sat in the back of the courtroom and nodded when I spoke. And that support, that solidarity, that was something I had never expected, and it meant more to me than I could ever say. The verdict. Let me tell you about the moment that made everything worth it, the moment when justice finally tasted sweet. The moment when I heard the words I had been waiting for, hoping for, praying for, and I realized that all the pain, all the humiliation, all the sleepless nights, all the tears, all the fear, all the moments when I wanted to give up, they had all been leading to this. This single moment when a jury of ordinary people looked at the evidence and said, "We believe you. What happened to you is wrong. And you deserve to be compensated for what you lost." The day of the verdict was the longest day of my life. It felt like time had stopped, like the universe was holding its breath. Like everything I had ever done and ever been was culminating in this one moment. And I sat in that courtroom with my husband's hand in mine. And I watched the jury file in. I watched their faces, trying to read them, trying to see any sign of what they had decided. But they were stone-faced. They showed nothing. They gave nothing away, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I could barely breathe. I could barely think. I could barely do anything except sit there and wait and hope and pray. The judge asked the foreperson of the jury to stand, and I held my breath. I literally held my breath because I was so afraid, so terrified that after everything, after all the evidence, after all the testimony, after all the pain I had relived in that courtroom, they would still decide against me. They would still believe Mr. Harrison's lies. They would still tell me that my English was the problem, that I deserved what happened to me, that I had no right to be angry, no right to fight back, no right to demand justice. And I felt like I was going to be sick. I felt like I was going to pass out. I felt like I could not handle another disappointment, another rejection, another moment of being told that I was not enough. But then the foreperson spoke, and she said the words that changed everything. She said, "We the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Elena Nguyen, on all counts, and we award her compensatory damages in the amount of $250,000. And I heard those words, and I could not believe it. I could not process it. I just sat there staring at her like she was speaking a foreign language, like I had not understood what she said. And then I felt my husband squeeze my hand. I felt him pull me into a hug, and I heard him saying, "You did it, Elena, you did it, you won." And then I started crying. I cried so hard I could not stop. I cried because I was relieved. I cried because I was happy. I cried because I was proud. I cried because I had finally been vindicated, finally been seen, finally been told that I mattered, that my pain mattered, that my voice mattered, that I was not invisible, not worthless, not a joke, but a person who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. And I looked over at Mr. Harrison, and his face was white, completely white, like all the blood had drained out of it, like he could not believe what had just happened, like he had been so sure he would win, so sure that he could crush me like he had crushed so many others. And I looked him in the eye, and I did not feel anger, I did not feel hatred, I did not feel satisfaction at his pain. I just felt relief. I felt peace. I felt the weight of years of humiliation finally lifting off my shoulders, and I realized that winning was not about making him suffer. It was about proving to myself that I was strong enough to fight back, that I was brave enough to stand up, that I was worthy enough to demand justice, and that was a victory that no amount of money could ever measure. The aftermath of the verdict was overwhelming. There were news reporters outside the courthouse. They had heard about the case. They wanted to interview me. They wanted to know how I felt, what I was going to do now, and I stood there with my husband, and I spoke to them. I told them my story. I told them about the discrimination, the humiliation, the firing, and I told them about the victory. And I said something that I had been holding inside for a long time. I said, "Your accent is not a weakness. It is a strength. It is proof that you are brave enough to learn a new language, to build a new life, to face challenges that most people will never understand. And anyone who tries to make you feel small because of how you speak is not someone who deserves to define your worth." And those words resonated. They spread. They were shared on social media. They were picked up by immigrant advocacy groups. They became a little rallying cry for people who had been made to feel like they did not belong. And that was more meaningful to me than any amount of money. That was the real victory, knowing that my story could help others, that my fight could give others the courage to fight back, that my voice could inspire others to use theirs. But I also want to be honest with you, winning the lawsuit did not solve everything. It did not erase the pain. It did not take away the memories. It did not undo the years of humiliation. And there were still days when I would wake up and feel that familiar shame. That familiar feeling of being not enough. That familiar voice in my head telling me that I did not really belong. That I was just an immigrant who got lucky. That I had not really earned my victory, and it took time, a lot of time, to unlearn those beliefs. To stop believing the things that Mr. Harrison and people like him had told me, to start seeing myself as someone who is strong and capable and worthy, not because of what I had achieved, but because of who I was. And I want you to know that if you are going through something similar, if you have been made to feel small because of your accent or where you come from or the way you speak, that feeling is not your fault. It is the result of a system that makes it easy for people to judge and discriminate and hurt others, but it is also something you can fight, something you can overcome, something you can rise above, and you do not have to do it alone. There are people who will help you, who will believe in you, who will stand with you, and you are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and more powerful than you can possibly imagine. A new beginning. Let me tell you about the person I became after the lawsuit, because winning that case was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new, something better, something that I could never have imagined when I was sitting in that parking lot with my cardboard box and my tears. And I want you to understand that justice is not just about the money or the verdict or the moment when the jury says you won. Justice is also about what happens after. It is about healing, about growing, about becoming the person you were always meant to be. And for me, that meant learning to see myself differently, learning to value my voice, learning to believe that I was not just an immigrant with an accent, but a person with something important to say, something valuable to contribute, something that the world needed to hear. After the trial, I took some time to breathe, to process, to heal. I went to therapy. I talked to someone about all the pain I had been carrying for years, the pain of being told I was not good enough, the pain of being made to feel invisible, the pain of believing that I deserved to be treated badly because of how I spoke. And that was hard. It was really hard because I had to face all the things I had been trying to ignore, all the shame, all the anger, all the self-doubt. But it was also liberating because for the first time in my life, I started to see that none of that pain was my fault. That I had been a victim of discrimination, yes, but I was also a survivor, a fighter, a person who had refused to let the bullies win. And that was something to be proud of, something to celebrate, something to carry with me as a badge of honor rather than a scar of shame. I also started writing again, not just the little notes I had kept in my notebook, but real writing, stories, articles, essays. I wrote about my experience, about the discrimination I had faced, about the lawsuit, about the victory, and I shared my writing with the world. I published it on blogs, I submitted it to magazines, I started a YouTube channel where I told my story in slow, clear English, because I wanted to help other people who were going through the same thing. I wanted to show them that they were not alone, that they were not invisible, that their voices mattered, and that they could fight back and win, just like I had. And the response was overwhelming. People from all over the world reached out to me. They told me that my story had inspired them, that it had given them the courage to speak up, that it had made them feel seen and heard and valued. And I realized that my pain, my struggle, my fight, it had all been for something bigger than myself. It had been for all the other immigrants, all the other people who had been made to feel small, all the other voices that had been silenced. And that was a beautiful feeling. That was a feeling that made all the suffering worth it, that made every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt worth it, because I knew that I was making a difference, that I was helping others, that I was using my voice to amplify the voices of people who had been told they did not matter. I also got a new job, a much better job, a job where I was valued and respected, a job where my accent was seen as an asset rather than a liability, a job where I could use my skills and my experience and my unique perspective to make a real contribution. And that was healing in a way I had not expected, because it showed me that not all workplaces were like the one I had left. That there were good people out there, fair people, people who value diversity and inclusion and who understood that different perspectives make a team stronger, not weaker. And I loved my new job, I loved the people I worked with, I loved the work I was doing, and for the first time in a long time, I actually looked forward to going to work in the morning. I actually felt excited about my career. I actually believed that I had a future in this country, and that was a gift that I had earned through blood and tears and a sheer stubborn refusal to give up. But the most important change was internal, the way I saw myself, the way I talked to myself, the way I believed in myself, because for so long, I had been my own worst critic. I had believed all the negative things people had said about me. I had internalized their prejudice and made it my own, but winning that lawsuit taught me something important. It taught me that I was not the problem, that I had never been the problem, that the problem was a system that made it easy for people to discriminate and hard for people to fight back, and that I had the strength, the courage, and the voice to fight back and win, and that changed everything. I started speaking up more, not just about discrimination, but about everything. I shared my opinions in meetings, I offered my ideas. I challenged people when I thought they were wrong, and I did not apologize for it. I did not make myself small. I did not pretend to be someone I was not. I just showed up as myself, with all my imperfections and my accent and my unique perspective. And I found that people respected me for it. They listened to me, they valued what I had to say, and that was empowering, that was liberating. That was the person I had always wanted to be, but had been too afraid to become. I also started mentoring other immigrants, other people who were struggling with the same things I had struggled with, other people who were trying to build a life in a new country and facing all the same challenges, and I told them my story. I told them about the discrimination, the humiliation, the lawsuit, the victory, and I told them that they could do it too, that they did not have to accept being treated badly, that they had the right to fight back, that they had the right to demand to be treated with dignity and respect, and watching them find their voice, watching them start to believe in themselves, watching them fight back and win, that was the most rewarding thing I have ever done. Because it was like watching a garden grow, like watching seeds that I had planted bloom into beautiful flowers. And I knew that my legacy was not just my own victory, but all the victories of the people I had helped along the way. And I want you to know that you can do it too, whatever you are going through, whatever challenges you are facing, whatever voices are telling you that you are not enough, you can fight back, you can win. You can find your voice and use it to change your life and the lives of others, and you do not have to be perfect. You do not have to have perfect English. You do not have to sound like a native speaker. You just have to be brave enough to speak, brave enough to be seen, brave enough to demand the respect you deserve, because you deserve it. You have always deserved it. And no one can take that away from you unless you let them. So that is my story. The story of how I got fired for my English, how I won a lawsuit, how I found justice and healing and purpose, and how I learned that my voice matters, that your voice matters, that every voice matters, and that we are all stronger when we speak up and fight back and refuse to be silenced. I am Elena. I am an immigrant. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am a writer. I am a fighter, and I am so grateful that I did not give up. So grateful that I kept going. So grateful that I found the courage to stand up and speak my truth, because it changed everything. It changed my life. It changed my family's life, and it changed the way I see myself and my place in this world. And I hope that my story inspires you to do the same. To find your voice, to fight for what is right, to never give up on yourself, because you are worthy, you are enough. And you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, always. So here we are at the end of my story, but really, this is just the beginning of something much bigger. Because what I learned through this entire journey, through the humiliation, the firing, the lawsuit, the victory, is that your voice matters. Your accent is not a weakness, but a badge of honor, proof that you are brave enough to learn a new language, to build a new life, to face challenges that would break most people. And if you are watching this right now, if you are someone who has ever felt like your English was not good enough, like you did not belong, like your voice did not matter, I want you to hear me when I say this. You are wrong. You are so wrong, because the very fact that you are here, that you are trying, that you are learning, that you are fighting to improve, that makes you stronger, braver, and more resilient than you will ever know. I want you to remember that the people who made me feel small, the people who told me my English was not good enough, the people who fired me for the way I spoke, they were wrong. They were absolutely wrong, and I proved it. I proved it in a courtroom. I proved it to a jury. I proved it to myself. And I proved it to everyone who has ever been told that they do not belong. Because belonging is not about sounding perfect. It is not about having a flawless accent or never making a mistake. It is about showing up as your authentic self and refusing to let anyone make you feel like you are less than. And I want you to think about your own journey, about the challenges you have faced, about the moments when you wanted to give up, about the times when you felt like your voice did not matter. And I want you to know that you are not alone, that millions of people around the world are going through the same thing, that there is a whole community of people who understand exactly what you are feeling, and that we are all in this together. We are all fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, and we will not stop until we have won that fight. This is why I created this channel. This is why I am sharing my story, not to brag about my victory, not to make you feel like you need to be perfect, but to show you that it is possible, that you can overcome the obstacles, that you can find your voice, that you can fight back and win, and that your story, your voice, your perspective is valuable and necessary and worth sharing with the world. So I am going to keep making videos, I'm going to keep telling stories, I'm going to keep helping people practice their English in a slow, clear, easy to understand way, and I am going to keep reminding you that you are enough, just as you are, with every accent, every mistake, every imperfect sentence, because that is what makes you human, that is what makes you real, that is what makes you beautiful. And I want you to be part of this community. I want you to subscribe to this channel. I want you to hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. I want you to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Because together, we can change the narrative. Together, we can show the world that accents are not weaknesses, they are strengths. Together, we can prove that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter where they come from or how they speak. So do it now. Click that subscribe button. Join this family of learners, of fighters, of people who refuse to be silenced. And let us continue this journey together, because the best is yet to come, the best stories are still being written, and your story, your voice, your journey is just beginning, and I cannot wait to see where it takes you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are enough. You have always been enough. And nothing and no one can ever take that away from you. Subscribe now, and let's keep practicing, keep learning, keep growing, keep fighting, keep winning together. That's all for today. I will make more similar videos in the future. Please subscribe to watch. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment your story below. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.